Welcome to our spring university update featuring our president, Steve Thorsett, and provost, Carol Long. My name is Shelby Radcliffe, and I serve Willamette as the vice president of advancement, and I am facilitating this discussion today. First, a few business items. Tonight's program includes a question and answer format style interview with President Thorsett and Provost Long. Thank you to those of you who provided some questions in advance. We will hope to save time for questions at the end. So you're welcome to submit questions via the chat, and we will either interject them or we will try to get to them at the end. Any questions we don't get to answer during the presentation, we will follow up with you afterwards. We have a team working behind the scenes to support us this evening, led by Tiffany Newton, who you've already heard, Director of Alumni and Parent Engagement. She and her colleagues will be monitoring the Zoom, and they are here to assist anyone who's having technical issues. Please use the Q&A button at any time to seek technical assistance from the team. So if you're not hearing sound, or if you're not seeing video, or if you're not able to submit a chat, anything like that, go ahead and use that Q&A button if you can. And now, while longer bios are available in the chat right now, it is my pleasure to introduce our guests. President Thorsett became president of Willamette University in July of 2011. He is an internationally recognized astrophysicist who brings to Willamette more than 3 decades of experience as a scholar, teacher, and academic leader. He also grew up in Salem, where he went to South Salem High School. He is the son, I should say, of Karen and Grant Thorsett. Grant, a beloved biology professor who is now a faculty emeritus at Willamette. Carol Long serves as provost and senior vice president at Willamette. In her role, she focuses on enhancing collaboration among our now 5 colleges of Willamette University and between student and academic affairs. Provost Long spent over 30 years at Willamette University as a professor of English. During that time, she also served as department chair, associate dean, and dean of the College of Liberal Arts before departing in 2009 to become provost at the State University of New York College of Geneseo. Ultimately, she served there also as their interim president. We are very fortunate that she returned to Willamette in August of 2016, still one of the best decisions I think President Thorsett has made in his tenure. Steve and Carol, thank you both for joining us this evening. I know that our guests are excited to hear about what's going on at their alma mater, so we will dig in, and I will go to the first question. I'm hoping both of you might address this, with Carol going first. Just last weekend, we launched the latest graduates of Willamette alumni out into the world. You've both been doing this work for a while now. What are your thoughts about how students have changed or not changed over the decades?
Well, thank you, Shelby, and thanks for the introductions. I think in many ways, our graduates are still very much like all of you who are with us this evening, and they're curious, they're bright, they're dedicated to making the world a better place. They take care of each other. They always make friends, bond really well, and care for each other through all the time that they're here and afterwards. So in many ways, I think they're still the same. They come interested in a wide variety of things. They change their minds about what they're interested in all the time. So lots of good things. They work hard. They're serious. They love sports. They play hard as well as work hard. They're wonderful people to spend time with. We're very fortunate. Most of them, we have a higher number of folks from the West Coast and the West Coast region or the Pacific Rim region. That's certainly still true, but many from other states and other countries. We're beginning, again, to see more international students coming now. We didn't for a while have our international colleagues. I think some of the changes, for one thing, they spend a lot of time on social media, which, was not a thing in the past. And there are good and bad things about that. Their concern with identity is stronger, I would say, in many ways, or at least differently shaped than it was in the past. They're very concerned with defining that identity, and that has to do in some ways much more complicated things than we used to think about in thinking about how they formed their identity during this period of their lives, both in terms of career and in terms of other elements of their identity and their lives. And the thing that we all talk about a lot now is this is a higher level with good reason, given the state of the world of anxiety and maybe some more tensions that we didn't have to deal with, or they didn't have to deal with 10, 20 years ago, but they're wonderful people still.
Yeah. Steve, how about you?
Well, I agree with everything Carol said about the fact that there is something that is just unchanging in the Willamette student body. And I know that it dates back to long before I arrived, because, of course, many of you I have met and talked with about your experiences at Willamette going back another half century and more before my arrival here. And so the fact that there's something unchanging about 18 to 22-year-olds in particular, and Willamette students specifically, I think is absolutely true. I mean, sort of stepping back and looking demographically, there are some real differences in today's student body. It is a significantly more diverse student body than it was even when I arrived, racially and ethnically diverse, culturally diverse, especially socioeconomically diverse. I mean, one of the great advances that we've made at Willamette is to open our doors to talented students who might, in previous generations, have not been able to find a way to come to Willamette. And that's been a tremendously difficult challenge for the institution. Of course, all of you have heard quite a bit over the years about the need to raise funding to help support those students. But it also has brought some really interesting changes to the way that the students, as Carol says, form identity, but also the way that they relate to the outside world. We've got more than a quarter of our students now are first in family to attend college. And for both them and for other students, the relationship with family has changed. Our students are much more connected and stay more connected to the outside world than they once did. Parents are much more involved, which is a great blessing and also sometimes a great curse, a real challenge to help students find independent identities, which is one of the most important things that they do in a residential college environment. And I think for lots of reasons that you can imagine, students are more worried about life after Willamette, and that shapes how they think about what courses they take, what majors they study, and how they prepare themselves for the working world. I think we see more awareness in our student body of where the jobs are, and that's another really interesting change to the way we think about planning at Willamette and supporting both the real needs of our students and the needs that they perceive, even if they sometimes worry a little more than they need to about their readiness for post-Willamette life.
Steve, that's a perfect segue to my next question. Lately, you've done several presentations on campus and to our Board of Trustees about where Willamette has been 3 years ago today and where we're likely to be 3 years from now. For those of you who haven't been reading every single email and news story we send you, we've changed a lot in recent years. So will you talk a little bit about that? And I anticipate this will be a lengthier answer, but will you talk a little bit about that growth that we've seen and what challenges we've overcome and what exciting opportunities are ahead?
Well, I assume everybody does read every word that I send out.
Yes,
they should. You've forgotten parts of it. I mean, I do think that Willamette has really undergone a transformation in recent years, partly reflecting the needs of our students, partly reflecting our desire to diversify our student body, but largely just thinking about how best to prepare students to, as we say, turn knowledge into action when they leave Willamette. And the most, I mean, maybe the simplest way to frame it is just that we have thought more deeply about how to directly connect the traditional liberal education in the arts and sciences that Willamette has always done so well with professional practice and help students connect what they're learning in their liberal arts courses to the kinds of work that they want to do out in the world. And that's led us to move away from thinking of ourselves as a national liberal arts college that happens to have two small professional schools that orbit around it but don't interact very much with it, to thinking of ourselves as a university with a broad suite of programs that are available to all of our students, and thinking about how to integrate them in ways that maybe can only be done at a medium-sized teaching-focused institution like Willamette, not at a University of California campus like the one I came from, and not at an isolated liberal arts college like the one I went to at Carleton. So, I mean, in practice, what that looks like from the outside is the addition of some new schools and some new programs. And in our existing schools, we added undergraduate education to the remit of the Atkinson School. It's had the #1 ranked MBA program forever in Oregon, and has had a wonderful joint degree program that hands students off from the undergraduate college to the graduate school, but had no direct engagement in teaching undergraduates. And undergraduates today have many of them are looking for a school where they can study business or management, and being able to provide that in a liberal arts environment rather than in a standalone, isolated business school at a big university is a great thing to be able to do. And so we've added a major in business management, Bachelor of Science degree, but we've also added a minor that can be taken and individual courses that can be taken by students in any degree program, all taught by the same faculty who teach that MBA. And that really opened the doors to thinking about broadening undergraduate education. Looking around the Northwest, thinking about the really important areas that we needed to be have a stronger foothold in, art and design was an obvious one, which led us to the conversations that eventually led us to the merger of the Pacific Northwest College of Art into Willamette. Computer science and information science was another one, which led to the launch announced on Monday this week of, as you say, shall be Willamette's 5th school, the School of Computing and Information Sciences. Again, integrated with our liberal arts program, same general education requirements for students doing majors in that school as in the arts and sciences school, same writing expectations and so on, but with a really expanded range of opportunities for students to engage as undergraduates in this really interesting new field of human-centered computing that we're seeing so much news about at the moment. And with that came new graduate programs, new MFA programs, new MFA in writing, the new Master of Science program in data science, which has been doubling in size every year for several years now, the new Master of Science in computer science that'll launch next year. So it's been this real blossoming of the university into something much more complex and in many ways more interesting than just non-interacting colleges.
Yeah, just to put a fine point on it, I think when I started in 2016, we offered 4 degrees: the BA, the JD, the LLM, which is the management of law, and the MBA. And now we offer the BA and the BS at the undergraduate level, and also the BFA, Bachelor's of Fine Arts. We still offer the JD and the LLM and the MBA, but we also offer MFA and an MS in data science and an MS in computer science. So,
and some MA degrees as well.
And then some MA in creative writing. Yes. So we have greatly expanded our degree offerings. We've also expanded our physical presence. Carol, do you want to talk a little bit about what it's like to have 2 campuses and what programs are where, just briefly?
Well, we're still learning what it means to be a 2-city campus, frankly.
Yes.
You know, we've long had a footprint in Portland with the MBA for professionals with the Graduate School of Management. But with PNCA joining us, we have a much larger footprint there. Portland has changed also, so learning how to be in Portland is kind of a new thing, and thinking about how those programs relate to each other. Excuse me. So in Portland now, we have the MBA for professionals, the MBAP. Masters of Data Science has a cohort in Portland. I imagine the Masters in Computer Science eventually will start that there. We have the BFA, the MA, the MFA, a variety of degrees in the MFA at PNCA. And we're talking about what else? What does our footprint really look like in Portland? Are there other things that the schools, all of the schools might add there? How does that get related? What kind of space do we need there? We've looked at a variety of options, but already we have this wonderful building, the main building of PNCA, with beautiful facilities and the most exciting printmaking studio I've ever seen, a great photography studio in the basement. on the roof of the PNCA building, the Schnitzer building, there is a marker from the geodesic survey. It was the original point from which Portland was measured when they were doing the early geodesic survey, because it was the primary post office at the time. So we are the center of Portland. Don't tell anybody, but trying to figure out how we live that life and how we relate back and forth between the two locations. And if anybody has, a way to get rapid transit up and down I-5, I would be very pleased. But in the meantime, we're learning how to do things in a hybrid fashion with a course that's offered on both campuses, right? We're learning how to differentiate our services to students on the two campuses. Some of our faculty teach on both campuses. We have students who take some classes in Portland and come back to their main degree campus here in Salem and vice versa. And learning how to integrate all of these programs as well as the space is totally fascinating. So we have, at the student level, a student can take a course in one of the other schools from wherever they're located. They can do double majors in many cases. We have one student who's doing a triple major next year. That makes me dizzy. One of those is at PNCA and two are in Salem, right? So they're doing a great job of integrating all this stuff, and we're trying to keep up with them, basically. Faculty also, as I mentioned, will teach maybe a course on each campus. We've had faculty from CAS teaching in PNCA and vice versa. In terms of degrees, we've had the 3-2 with Atkinson and CAS, the 3-3 with the law school, the 3-1 now with data science and CAS, but we're looking at a variety of other possible degree connections, either as handoff degrees or integrated structures. And we now have faculty talking with, for instance, computer science and design, trying to think about, okay, what degree could we design that really answered the needs of both of those fields? And how would that be structured? Is it a degree we develop together as these two faculties? So it's really exciting to see people inventing all these flourishing, challenging things,
Yes, and for the alumni who are with us, I will explain that CAS is the short term for the College of Arts and Sciences, what many of you know as the College of Liberal Arts. It was a change in name only, but really designed to address the question that we were consistently getting from students and their families about whether or not we actually had science majors in the College of Liberal Arts, which of course we do. We have many of them. So that change came about maybe 3 years ago, really to address a question that was routine, and we didn't want people to not look at Willamette because they imagined we didn't have a science program for undergraduates. So speaking of the sciences, Steve, can you talk a little bit about our newest school that was officially created by the board with their vote on Saturday of commencement weekend last weekend, the School of Computing and Information Sciences? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, this is a project that's been underway for a long time. Obviously, you don't just wake up at a board meeting and decide, let's launch a new school. But it's reached a really interesting point. And Willamette's been engaged in teaching students about computers since computers have been in routine use. As I was telling Shelby recently, my dad in 1967, in his first committee at Willamette, was the committee that bought Willamette's first computer. And I worked in the computer camps in the mid-'70s at Willamette. And of course, we've had graduates of first a combined department and then later a standalone computer science department go on to do wonderful things in Silicon Valley and all over the world, really, for a long time. I think what's changed in recent years is that as computing has become more integrated in human life in so many ways, and in the work people do in fields that seem a long ways away from computing, we started to see areas of distinction all over the campus. So we had faculty in the management school, obviously interested in business analytics, who were doing a lot of analysis of big data sets. We had faculty in the natural sciences and the social sciences and in mathematics and statistics. And we wanted to find a way to build some supporting programs that were authentic to Willamette's approach to education. I mean, we at our core is the liberal arts, but the idea of liberal education is buried within each of our independent schools. You know, the management schools focus on generic management across sectors, for example, general skills. And we wanted to think about how we would introduce students to general skills relating to computer science and data science, and the use of big data sets, in a way that didn't silo it into a bioinformatics degree and a business analytics degree and a track in the psychology department on statistics and the like, but brought people together around the idea of preparing students across a broad range of fields for applications that we can't think of now, that 20 years from now they're going to need to be ready for. So we put together an interdisciplinary group called a Committee of Studies a few years ago that brought together these faculty from around the university and said, okay, you interdisciplinary faculty from different schools, you take charge of defining a revised computer science degree. You take charge of thinking about how we introduce a data science degree. And that committee launched the first undergraduate degree in data science in our peer group, and then a year later launched what is now still the only nationally ranked Master of Science in Data Science in the Pacific Northwest, which was a really exciting move. We saw a lot of growth, student interest at the undergraduate level. I think in the fall, we will have the combination of data science and computer science as the biggest cluster of majors in the undergraduate college. As I said, the Master of Science program's been growing really fast. I think we'll probably have somewhat over 40 MS students entering in the fall next year. And it became clear that we could do more. Thought about adding a Master of Science degree, and then realized that it was time to give these faculty the ability to self-govern, to define how they identified new faculty to hire, to evaluate their peers, to think about all of the programmatic things they were already doing. And that really means a school. So the launch of the new school really responded to that rapid growth. And it launched with 9 full-time faculty. We've got 3 searches underway for next year. So should have a dozen faculty by the end of next year. So about a little more than half the size of Atkinson at its launch. Reasonably sizable, but a rapidly growing number of students. And the faculty sat down and thought, well, what is a Willamette approach here? We're really good at computer science. We know how to teach students to code. We know the formal side of computing, we do really well. We've become really good at teaching students about data. How do you analyze big data sets? How do you think about the ethical concerns around collecting and using big data sets? And we built a strong degree there. But somewhere in between those two fields, there's this field of information science, really where data and computing come together and touch the human experience. So we talk about it as human-centered computing. And really the direction that the school is going is thinking about how do we look at the human-computer interface? How do we think about collaborating with our art and design faculty on data visualization? How do we think about data journalism and communicating in a way that is honest with data and evidence and tells a story that people can follow? And so I think over the next few years, you're going to see a really interesting, distinctive niche for the school that should have national prominence, really coming from that interdisciplinarity and the ability to collaborate across those school boundaries.
Yes, we've long believed that the liberal arts style of education was the better style for the students' development intellectually and professionally, and we're applying those same principles to the development even within these science-sounding degrees, because data is truly everywhere. It's pretty exciting. And so 12 faculty will be, as you said, they'll be from all different disciplines within computing and information sciences, right? So there'll be someone who does gaming, there'll be someone who does market-based research, there'll be someone who all kinds of different things, a statistician, traditional computer scientists who are dealing with actually writing and improving code. It's pretty cool.
And we do expect that that they will be not just offering their own degrees, but offering courses and service essentially to students across the whole institution. I mean, an example of that is that they've now taken, over the last couple of years, over the management of what we call the Quad Center, which is the center that supports students who need some in-depth support, typically when they're doing a thesis in statistical and quantitative analysis techniques. So if you're doing a social sciences, sociology thesis, say, that uses a big data set, and you need to have experts who can help you in sort of the same way that the Writing Center has long helped students think about structuring a thesis paper, it's a group that will serve students in any discipline. And even for students who have a major which is very different from data science or computer science, whether they're or for that matter a graduate student in the business analytics group, or an artist who needs to figure out how to use climate data, for example, to tell a story that makes meaning of some experience in the world, have this resource in the university now of an interdisciplinary group of faculty interested in working with them. That's what distinguishes Willamette. I mean, it is the crossing of the boundaries, and that's my job and Carol's job as academic leads to make sure that we maintain that culture as we continue to grow.
I've said for years that the computer science department is the English department of the 21st century, right? Because it teaches something that everyone in every discipline needs to know, right? And that fact is borne out by the new school faculty taught 300 undergraduate students in this past year. It's very nice to see.
It's unbelievable. You could imagine it becomes a core requirement in a future curriculum not too long from now, right? So speaking of growing, all this growth, how big do we really want to get? Either one of you can take this answer. How big are we now? I guess we should start there. How big will we be once we have no more small classes from COVID times? And then how big do we want to get?
Yeah, so maybe since I've been giving this presentation to trustees and others recently, I'll start with this. But you have to understand there are two big factors in addition to the programmatic changes at Willamette that affect the size of the institution. One is an external ongoing challenge, which is that the number of traditionally aged college students is declining for the first time in a long time, and will start declining faster in the next couple of years. And so all institutions, including Willamette, have been thinking about how do we continue to be vibrant and successful in a world in which the number of customers, as you might call them, is declining with time. And that is, of course, one reason that Willamette is thinking about broadening both its range of disciplines to attract those traditionally aged students, but also looking at graduate growth as a way to balance some of that decline. So that's one big trend. The other big thing has been COVID. And COVID has came in like a, maybe not dinosaur killing asteroid, but a pretty sizable airburst asteroid into higher education. And for Willamette, that meant in our residential college, we had 2 years where we had no visitors essentially on campus, very little access to schools to talk to prospective students, and very small incoming classes. So 3 years ago, Willamette was actually at its smallest size in probably 20 years, at maybe 1,900 degree-seeking students across the institution.
All of the colleges.
That's except PNCA, which wasn't part of us yet.
Right.
And so one of the challenges has been to manage through that temporary 2-year downturn. Those students will be juniors and seniors next year, so they'll be with us. That's most small classes will be with us for 2 more years, but then also to think about the bigger changes. And going back to one of the points I made early on about the ability of students to pay, socioeconomic diversity means we've got to find ways to be cheaper. And cheaper, if you don't change the student-faculty ratio and other important things, means being bigger, so you can be more efficient. So all these factors come together, and we just were not big enough at 1,900 students to be able to do all of the things that we want to do for our students. So one reason we were looking at mergers at that time was to build efficiency. And from PNCA's perspective, this was an even bigger problem for them. They were 450 students, down from 550 students before COVID in round numbers, and just much too small to really be able to flourish going forward. So the merger was a big step forward. And then the expansion of programs has been another big step forward. We've had 2 years in a row now, including the students for next fall, where we've had about 1,000 new Bearcats joining Willamette across all of our schools in 1 year. That means we've gone from 1,900 students 3 years ago to 2,550 students this coming fall, is our best estimate. There's still some recruiting in the grad schools to go. And over the next 2 years, as those small classes graduate, if we continue to recruit the same number of students, we'll be over 3,000 students for the first time, probably up to about 3,300 students 3 years from now. So, I mean, that's a tremendous change. It means lots of faculty hiring is going on. It means we're thinking about a lot of residence halls that have been mothballed for a couple of years during COVID, bringing them back out and ready for students. And just how do we get ready for that size? But it also means for the first time in a long time, Willamette's looking at having real opportunities to invest in that growth and to think about new programs and where we want to hire to be most relevant for the needs of these students in this century. And that's a really exciting set of conversations. So it's a pretty rare place for an institution to be at this moment in time, where a decline is the bigger enrollment story at almost all of our peer institutions.
One of the questions I'm seeing in our chat is about how students declare a major and when they declare a major with all these different schools offering the undergraduate programs. But I know that our students still don't need to declare until their sophomore year. So they are undergraduate, College of Arts and Sciences students. I should be more specific. If they're choosing to go to PNCA as an undergraduate, they are choosing to pursue a BFA. But if they're choosing to go to the College of Arts and Sciences, they can pursue a BA or a BS in a variety of things, and they don't have to choose until the end of their sophomore year. So a lot of exploration is possible. Those 300 students, Carol, that you referenced, taking the Intro to Data Science, that was mostly first and second year students, correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So we could anticipate that trend continuing, and us. But those students have not yet chosen data science or computer science as a major. And in fact, many of them will not major in data science and computer science. Maybe they'll minor in it if we have a minor someday. But students from other disciplines are taking those courses. Carol, do you have anything to add about the process of choosing a major
Well,
for the undergraduates?
we encourage on PNCA, the PNCA campus as well, really encourages a time for discernment, for choice for the students. I love students who come in undecided, it gives them a chance to really try some things out. But yeah, they are asked to declare a major by the beginning of their junior year. Many of them will declare before that. They can't even really declare the business major until their sophomore year. So we really encourage them to look around. I guess one of the interesting things we've seen that was not expected, and it's happened this year, we've had one student who came and enrolled in PNCA and got there and looked around and said, I want to go to CAS. So we invented a form for changing your degree path, right? So we have one student who's moved from the BFA to the BA, and we have, I think, 4 students who've gone the other way. They were further along in their careers, but they decided that they wanted to move from a BA in art to a BFA in art, let's say. And we've had a lot of students taking courses across the boundary where they'll take, we're also trying to figure out how you track somebody who's, and this is not entirely plausible yet for everybody because of space and structures of time, but we're getting there, who might be a PNCA student who wants also to have a minor in data science or a minor in philosophy or a major in sociology, you name it. And we're trying to find ways to make that kind of integration more possible and plausible. That's included making an academic calendar that is uniform across the whole institution and making, this makes my brain hurt, a bell schedule that is common across the whole university. So that will make it more possible as we go forward for students and faculty to explore this kind of cross-pollination.
Yeah.
I think it's, it probably isn't really clear for everybody from outside yet, but Willamette really has 2 undergraduate colleges now. We have the Portland Art and Design College, PNCA, and we have the Salem Undergraduate College, which isn't really the College of Arts and Sciences anymore. It's a joint effort of the Arts and Sciences faculty, the Computing and Information Sciences faculty, and management faculty, who are all together teaching, responsible for teaching Salem undergraduates. But those 2 colleges have separate identities. They have different admissions processes. If you want to be a BFA student, you better have a strong portfolio. We have really strong academically qualified students who get into places like MIT at PNCA, but don't get into PNCA because they don't have the strength in the art portfolio that's needed there. And similarly, the residential college has its own set of standards for admission. It has very strong students, as Carol mentioned. Our average weighted GPA this year among deposits was 3.99. And even the unweighted GPA is around 3.7 now. So these are really strong academically qualified students. And moving back and forth between those 2 colleges is a little bit complicated because students are differently qualified when they come in. And so the kind of work that Carol's doing and figuring out how to help students move back and forth is a little more complicated than it might otherwise look.
Yeah. Steve, you've touched on this a bit, but someone has asked a question. I think it'll help you put a clear explanation of the difference between Willamette's programs and what might be happening elsewhere. So here's the question. UC Berkeley has recently announced their first new college in 50 years, a College of Computing, Data Science, and Society. Other than their new school will be housed in a 367,000 square foot building. How will our school be different?
It really does come down to that question of siloing. And just to broaden that out a little bit more, I come from the research university world, right? I was initially educated in a liberal arts college, residential liberal arts college, but I spent my whole career before Willamette at Caltech and Princeton and University of California, Santa Cruz campuses. So big campuses that were organized around graduate instruction and research, especially in the sciences, the support of contract research for the federal government and sometimes for other people paying for research. Those kind of institutions are a great American invention, right? One of the real strengths of the U.S. coming out of the Morrill Act and Abraham Lincoln's creation of land-grant universities was this idea of these big research universities that are driving innovation and driving economic development and preparing the next generation of college faculty. But they are organized around that mission. And what I found as a dean in a science division on a UC campus is that the silo structures are there because they're really important to support the cultures of research and to support the kind of instrumentation and supportive instrumentation and the like that's needed. And before I was dean, I chaired the astronomy department at Santa Cruz. We struggled to have the astronomy department and the planetary science department or the physics department talk to each other, much less the astronomy department and the math department or the engineering departments. It's just the way those work. And so I think some of these new schools, like the one at Berkeley, are going to be really interesting experiments in graduate education and research support. And Harvard, some years ago now, when I was last out there for the inauguration of Drew Faust, I think, which was many years ago, they had a center set up that was around data science. It was just faculty talking to faculty. There was no programmatic piece of it at all, and that's just the complete opposite of what we're doing at Willamette. At Willamette, we are starting with this idea of building cross-disciplinary programs, figuring out how to educate students in a relatively generic way so that they're prepared for a broad range of different outcomes. And then we think about how do we build the faculty to build and support those kinds of programs. And so just fighting that siloing, I think, is what makes us different. And I think it's going to make us a better program than any of these big research universities for undergraduate education, just as we have been in the arts and sciences for a long time. And I think it's going to make us a more interesting program for the kind of cross-disciplinary collaborations that can build a different kind of distinction in areas like art and design and computation and data. And I've talked before about one of our models being the media lab at MIT, but thinking for the 21st century, what is that kind of cross-disciplinary, sort of deep but student-focused and education-focused institution going to look like?
And if I understand correctly from Jamison Watts, our new dean of the new school, we're building these MS programs with professionals in mind. We are not building these MS programs to prepare people to go on to get a PhD. We're preparing these we're designing these MS programs so that young professionals who need to increase their skills around these areas, because this is just going to be part of everybody's life now, they can acquire the skills they need to advance their careers. And that's actually a much bigger audience of students, I think, than those who would want to go on for a PhD. Am I making this up, or am I correct about it?
No, I think that's true, Shelby. And I think it also speaks to the fact that the school is building very strong relationships with local industry, with the design industry through PNCA. And that gives us a lot of professor of practice access, people who are in the field. It gives internship opportunities to our students. So it is a very much knowledge into action kind of program. And that's exciting for everyone. I think also the mission of this school has been really interesting because before this structuring that we've been doing, it was difficult for us to hire in computer science and some of these fields. We have been very fortunate in hiring for this program now that this has been created, because the mission itself attracts a whole lot of interesting candidates. who are looking for that kind of connection and that kind of interdisciplinary thinking. So we've been, hiring from a lot of our neighboring colleges, actually, which is kind of fun.
We love stealing great talent.
Yeah.
Someone is asking how student recruitment messages for our undergraduates, I think, if I'm reading between the lines, both BFA and BA and BS undergraduates, how those recruiting strategies and messages may be changing to talk about the increased options and what messages seem to resonate best with students and our parents. William Mullen, who's our VP for Enrollment Management, is not with us today. His team is in charge of the process of messaging and marketing to students, which it looks much different than it did certainly when I applied to college, and all you did was get the FISC guide out and fill out an application. But can either of you speak a little bit to the messaging for helping our students understand the breadth of the options that they now have at Willamette, or potential students, I should say?
Well, I mean, public perceptions of institutions evolve very, very slowly. There are lots of audiences that you're talking to, including alumni and parents who knew the institution a generation ago, sometimes grandparents who knew it a couple of generations ago. And even when working with professional counselors in schools, they have 1,000 institutions across the country they need to know something about. And so we've been working really hard focusing on that audience. We've been bringing a lot of counselors to campus, talking with them about the changes as schools have been reopening. It's still harder to get an admissions counselor out talking to guidance counselors than it was before COVID, but there's some of that going on again. And then, so just working on the long range repositioning of the institution. There'll be a new webpage design, actually not for another year, but the project is already underway. But in the short term, the most important thing is just to get the students on campus and to show them what they can find here. The most remarkable statistic in the post-COVID Willamette is that more than half of all of the students who come to a spring yield event end up choosing Willamette. And it's just amazing when you have 150 students on a Friday afternoon on the Willamette campus to experience the place, to know that the majority of those students are going to like what they see enough to say yes. And it really is our opportunity to tell the story, for them to meet the faculty and see what it really means and in what experience they'll have.
We have another question that's come in about BFA programming and how that and how we are talking mostly about the visual arts. And that is correct. Our BFA programs at PNCA are mostly in the visual arts and design world. Our theater and music programs and even a studio art degree still live in Salem. And those programs are BA programs, if I'm not mistaken. And so and vibrant, healthy programs, theaters consistently ranked very well. Our musicians are incredible. Harold, do you want to talk a little bit about how you think about integrated arts and what your fantasy is about Willamette 20 years from now when it comes to the integrated arts?
You should know better than to ask me a question like that, Shelby. Yeah, well, I do, and I talk with our dean at PNCA, Jen Cole, a lot with this off and on. I do believe that we have a great opportunity for integrated arts programming in a variety of ways. The first step into that actually is going to be in creative writing, because we're already talking about a BA MFA joint degree in creative writing, because we have a creative writing master's degree at PNCA, an undergraduate program in both campuses actually in creative writing. But I think with the animation, the music programs, we had a great collaboration this year between the digital music students on the Salem campus and the animation students in Portland. And they did a series of short films together where they worked with each other and animated and scored the whole thing. They're just wonderful. So we're already seeing, individual results of that capacity for collaboration. I imagine, of course, being, the Bard of the West and having a complete summer program that does all integrated arts and performances with a big festival at the end. But that's probably a few years from now.
Yes, it's true. But the performing arts and the visual arts are alive and well in Salem. Of course, we still have the Hallie Ford Museum on our Salem campus. As part of the PNCA acquisition, we also acquired what they had acquired several years prior, the Museum of Contemporary Craft Collection, which we're now renovating a building to house in Salem. We've already had our first exhibit of that collection. So that collection will begin to see the light of day again in a way that it hadn't prior to the merger. So the visual arts are still, or the performing arts and the visual arts are alive on both campuses, but certainly the performing arts are alive in Salem. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more formal question, and then people can submit more questions through the chat function. And you will not be surprised to hear this question because I am, in fact, the Vice President of Advancement. So my question is, how can alumni help continue to advance Willamette, the vision that you have for where we're going? What can alumni do?
So I want to pick up a question you didn't ask me from the chat and just address it sort of quickly, because I think it touches on this broader question of where's Willamette going to be in 20 years? Where will we be at our bicentennial? And that it was a question about facilities and how are we thinking about supporting the facilities needs of the bigger group. And specifically, there's a question about the boilers. As some of you know, we had a maintenance crew, a contract crew, mess up a contracted service on one of the boilers, which blew up. And then with supply chains and all, some of our dormitory buildings were dealing with space heaters this spring. No
one was injured in the explosion.
Nobody was injured, including the person who was working on the boiler when it blew up. But it is a challenging replacement, and some of you may have seen the Schnitzer Concert Hall in Portland just lost its air conditioner, and they have an 8-month delay there in getting the replacement parts. It was the last estimate I saw. We're dealing with the same issues here, but it's really focused attention on the fact that, we have a wonderful campus. It's a beautiful campus. It's great to have the old buildings. It's great to have the history. It's also an old campus. And thinking about maintenance needs of the campus has been really important. So we're replacing all the boilers essentially on campus starting this summer and going into next summer. Some of them go back to the 1950s. So it's been really behind the scenes. There's a tremendous amount going on to make sure that we have a really usable, beautiful campus into the bicentennial and beyond in Salem. But a more interesting question, and one that I think you should watch for more conversations about in the next couple of years, is the flip side of that. What's our position in Portland? We have almost 700 students in Portland now. We'll probably have 1,000 students in Portland in a few years with the graduate programs. We have beautiful space at 200 Market Street. We have the beautiful space at the PNCA building in the Pearl and Old Town. Are we going to build a traditional campus in Portland? Are we thinking of a different model for an urban campus? That's one of the big questions for all of us over the next couple of years. And there are a lot of people thinking hard about what should an urban university look like. And so keep your eyes open for more conversations about that. We're so lucky to be in downtown Salem, across from the Capitol, the center of public life in Oregon, and in downtown Portland, the commercial center of the state. And I think that using those two locations to serve all of our programs is going to be really, really important. On the question you asked, Shelby, about what all of our alumni and friends can do, I think so many of you are already doing it. I mean, the first thing we need is just engagement, awareness about how Willamette is changing, and the willingness to tell people about that. It goes back to that earlier question. The word of mouth is tremendously useful, and people who hear it from an insider remember it and get excited about it more readily. So that's number one. Number two, as Shelby said, the philanthropic support is really important. Willamette's benefited from 181 years of philanthropic support since that first campaign was launched on February 1, 1842. And we are fortunate, though, that we have one of the largest endowments in the Pacific Northwest, and that enables us to provide the student support to this wonderful set of students across all of our schools. But our needs are so great. Our students' needs are so great for financial support and all of the alumni support, especially for scholarships. Through COVID, when student families were disrupted, and today when we have so many more first-gen students and students with high financial need who can benefit from Willamette education is just so valuable. And I want to thank you for what you do and ask you to do more if you can.
I will also make a pitch for our alumni weekend, which is actually starting very soon, June 15th through the 18th. For those of you who have not yet registered, you're welcome to come, even if you are not celebrating a 5-year reunion on the 5-year, or I should say a reunion on the 5-year cycle. Everyone is welcome. And if you want to learn more about what's going on campus, it is a great time to be with us. So, I am not seeing any. Oh, wait, I might be wrong. Let me see here. Okay, we do have one more question. So we're formally entering the Q&A period. I'd like to encourage those of you who are here. We have a few more minutes with our esteemed guests. So for those of you who are with us online, please feel free to type in your question into the chat. I do have a question. With declining numbers of high school students and increasing competition between colleges and universities, what is our discount rate and what do you expect it to grow to over the next few years? A question from a savvy alum.
And there isn't an easy answer because it's different in every one of our schools, and it's different between first-year students and upper class students because of the way that merit aid and need-based aid adjust with tuition changes. In our traditional undergraduate college in Salem, the discount rate is right around 70% for first-year students, and it's around 60% overall averaged across all of the classes. The discount rate is lower at PNCA. It's probably around 60%, maybe for first-year students, and again, lower than that for upper-class students. In the graduate schools, it varies. 50% is more typical. The computer and data science, the data science MS is around 20%. It's a very high demand field and doesn't do a lot of merit aid. So it's limited aid at this point. It doesn't have its own endowment yet. So across the entire university, the average is probably about 50%.
Yeah. This is a fun question. Dr. Carol Long, what is the most recent novel you have read for pleasure rather than study?
Oh, goodness. Well, as some of you know, I have a terrible habit of reading junk mysteries. So at the moment, I'm reading a whole series of mystery novels that take place in Tuscany, which has been a lot of fun. But I will say my assistant, who is one of my former students, by chance, she appeared after decades and took the position of running our office, and she does a tremendous job. But she's also a great reader, participates in the tournament of books avidly, so she's got us reading all kinds of things. The most recent book she recommended to me was one called Murder Your Employer, which made me mildly nervous, but turns out I think she wasn't aiming at me. The subtitle of that book, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to remember the author's name. That's terrible, but I haven't finished reading it yet. The subtitle of that book is McMaster's Academy of the Applied Arts, right? So it's this wonderful sort of parody of a mystery novel and also a wonderful parody of academia because, yes, they have a fundraising arm, but they can't talk about what they do in their curriculum because they teach you how to, as they say, delete people, not murder them, but delete them. So anyway, I'm having fun reading junk mysteries.
That book, for those of you who are interested, is by Robert Holmes. Murder Your Employer, The McMaster's Guide to Homicide is the official title. That's fantastic. There's a question here about the fact that we do occupy several buildings west of the law school. So Winter Street in Salem is the street that tends to, we consider that the street that divides the undergraduate campus from the graduate campus, although of course those lines are blurring as well. So we now have faculty from Atkinson housed in a building on what would have been traditionally considered the undergraduate campus. But what are those buildings that are, do we own those buildings west of the law school? So we certainly own the Hallie Ford Museum. We own what used to be the YMCA or the YWCA? YWCA.
Yeah, we own all of the buildings except for the CenturyLink building until you get down to the Parkway. So they're in various use at the moment. We own the parking lots. We actually own the street that's parallel to Winter Street there. It's vacated, and we have some vacation rights on other streets there, should we choose to exercise them. So we have a lot of expansion space.
Yeah. Another timely question, what would the impact on Willamette be if the Supreme Court has a negative decision on affirmative action? How might it impact the diversity of our student body?
The sort of first order answer is that it won't have direct effects. So we haven't for some years used affirmative action in recruitment. There has been some, basically, we have diversified our campus in some ways in the old-fashioned way, right? We've gone to inner city high schools. We've looked for socioeconomic diversity in a way that even some of our much wealthier peers have not done, and that has led us to become the most diverse of our 5 Northwest Liberal Arts College peer group. And PNCA is even more diverse than the Salem campus. So even without formal affirmative action, I think that said, depending on how sweeping the ruling is, assuming that the ruling comes down the way people expect, we do have programs aimed at outreach into historically underrepresented communities. In the sciences and STEM fields, even Willamette Academy, which focuses on first-gen students. And it is possible that there will be a ruling that goes beyond the simple sort of boundaries of the case that's presented and complicates some of that work. And so we're trying to make sure that we understand how we would respond in all of those areas.
I should know the answer to this one, but I suppose it depends on what date we're talking about. But one of our guests would like to know what our current endowment is.
In round numbers, it's about $300 million. So it's probably a few million dollars above that at the end of this current fiscal year.
And when you consider endowment per student, so when you're thinking about the endowment of an institution, it's important to make that number relative to the size of the student body. So we often use the calculation of endowment per student to figure out, whether we have more or less money going to support our student programming than we might be than other institutions might. So we have a very high endowment per student rate compared to the other private universities in Oregon.
Well, compared to the private universities, even in absolute terms, Reed is the only institution in Oregon that is wealthier on either of those two metrics, right. Total endowment or endowment per student. Our endowment, I don't remember at the moment what the University of Oregon's endowment is, for example. They and Oregon State probably have larger absolute endowments, but of course they have 10 times as many students too. And so on a sort of the impact that endowment has on the life of an individual student is smaller.
Exactly. Do we have any thoughts? I have thoughts on the U.S. News's recent decision to drop alumni participation rate from the ranking calculation. I have lots of thoughts about this. Steve, Carol, do you want me to answer?
Go for it.
Go for it. Yeah.
I have hated this formula for a long time. So much of the U.S. News and World Report ranking system, so many of the different categories in that system are proxies for wealth, and this is just another one of them. There is the correlation. It's a false correlation to say that alumni who give, schools with higher alumni giving have more satisfied students. That's been proven over and over and over again. Predictors of giving do include satisfaction with your undergraduate experience, but the second one is wealth. And I'm talking about giving even in the $5 to $50 range. So schools with wealthier alumni have higher participation rates. Schools that are wealthier have bigger advancement offices and have whole teams of people working on the project of increasing their alumni participation. And it is the most transactional way to communicate with donors, to ask them to give a gift of any size because we need a ranking in a report. We have, for the last 6 years, we have completely rejected the notion that participation should be our guiding metric, and we instead focus on the number of donors and the retention of donors, and and having donors feel joy and feel great about the gifts that they are giving. And our annual fund has gone from $1.25 million to almost 2.8 million last year. So I think rejecting the notion that this metric should evaluate the quality of an institution and what it's doing for its students is a really important move. Of course, I'd like to see these rankings go away entirely. But I do think that this is the right decision, and it's about, if I can quote Lizzo, it's about damn time.
Yeah, it is not in my list of the most important changes in the recent rankings, though. I think the decision to stop essentially ranking on the basis of faculty's salaries, which the way the instructional ranking was counted, it was proportional to the amount of money that the faculty were being paid, which of course depends on, are you in New York or are you in Salem, Oregon, kind of questions, in addition to the wealth of the institution. And the number of the fraction of classes under 20 metric, it just never made sense. I mean, there are classes that should be seminar classes with 8 people, and there are classes that can be 35 people in a room and do just a wonderful job. And that piece of the ranking, which was pretty important, homogenized a lot of institutions' teaching in a way where some of their classes were bigger than they should have been, and many of their classes were smaller and more expensive than they needed to be, just to try to balance at 19 as your average class size, which was just a ridiculous way to run a university. So,
yeah. Yes.
U.S. News has looked primarily at inputs, and the assessment now tries to look at outputs, outcomes instead, and that's a much better, reader of quality, producer of quality. So.
Yes, I agree. Dr. Long, you have another question from a former student, although you could both answer this about the future of Willamette. We've heard tonight about programs being added to the Willamette family, but which majors or programs do you think might go away in the next 10 to 15 years? So in the interest of transparency, this is a former student of Dr. Long's and an English major.
Well, the
English won't go away.
English
won't go away. Yeah.
No.
Well, as everyone knows, the humanities and to some extent the arts in some of their forms have been really hard pressed in our current social and intellectual, if you call it that, environment nationally. These things do go in waves. We have not closed programs here. We have amalgamated some departments in the undergraduate college in Salem, so that anthropology and a couple of the languages, for instance, went into global cultural studies together. We're still offering majors in all of those fields, but they're working together to create some of the electives and so on to keep the department and the program and the faculty strong. So we'll manage through this, I think, with great success and not allow these very important fields that are important even to data scientists, right, to thrive as we go forward.
But there are changes. So, the politics program has been reimagined as politics, policy, law, and ethics. It was a very successful program as a standalone politics department, but it is a better and more successful program as an integrated discipline that responds to the need to integrate policy, for example, into that work. And similarly, in the languages, the expansion in Japanese and Chinese over the years has been balanced by some reductions in the traditional European languages that we taught a generation or two ago. And it's not that the languages are going away, but where we're focusing changes as the world focuses, as the Pacific Northwest focus changes, and as student needs change, and that will continue. But the core liberal arts and sciences have always, literally always, since the very beginning of Willamette, been at the core, and they always will be.
And
we don't require all of our students to study Greek and Latin in first and second years anymore.
But some of them still can.
They still can. We have a great classics program, but it's not the 19th century classics program.
Yeah. That is for sure. If anyone wants to look up Mary Bakarova, for example, she's a very modern classics professor in a lot of ways. I think great teaching makes students interested in these incredible subjects, and with being a smaller institution that focuses on teaching, we can deliver that to our students. So I think the humanities, the arts and humanities, are really safe at an institution like Willamette, where they are much more challenged at bigger institutions. We have exhausted our audience. They have asked, at least as far as I can tell, all of the questions they want to ask. So since we've been talking a lot about our future, let's just end with a quick sentence or two on 2042. We're going to be 200. What do you think is going to be true about Willamette or new about Willamette? Where will we be? How big will we be? Will we have 5 more colleges or schools? What do you see for us in 2042, which is actually not that far away?
No.
Do I go first?
I think we'll have a new version of the star trees. It will be a nice cohort of trees that's more climate relevant to 2042. And we'll have, I'm going to say 5,000 students, Steve, even though I know you say 4,000, but no more than that. And I think the important thing is that we're going to retain a size that keeps the capacity for us to be vibrant and interrelated and interdisciplinary and interconnected, which is very difficult when you get past a certain size. And you get the efficiencies. We'll get better at this integration and making the services work across the university as we go forward over the next years. So it'd be a very efficient and effective and integrated university with 4,000 to 5,000 students and new trees. How's that?
That sounds great. What about
you? And I don't think that we will grow as much as Carol is guessing. I would guess that we'll top out around 4,000 students, 2,000 of whom will be in the residential arts and sciences and management and other, basically the Salem residential undergraduate college. So the same size that it has historically been, with a slightly different mix of fields, a little broader than it's been, but basically, if you dropped in from a generation or two ago, it would look pretty similar. 500 undergrads in Portland, 1,500 graduate students, probably 1,000 of them in Portland and 500 of them in Salem. So it's a full-blown campus in both places, I think, and really a center, sort of arts and sciences, liberal arts focused, Salem, professionally focused Portland, with professional courses being taught both places, arts and sciences taught both places. But that's really how we will divide our focus at those two campuses. And I think that we'll be recognized for what I would argue we already are, which is the Pacific Northwest's leading private university. And that there won't be much question about that.
That's a great declaration. I like it. It's a perfect ending. Steve and Carol, thank you for taking time to be with us this evening. And thank all of you for joining us and participating. We could not be prouder of our Willamette family, and we so appreciate your willingness to engage tonight to hear about where Willamette has been, where Willamette is, and where Willamette is going, and all that you do as volunteers, as advocates, as ambassadors, and of course, as donors. to sustain us and move us forward in support of our students now and our future students. So thank you so much and have a great night. Take care, everyone.
Thanks all.